Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here with Mary O'Grady and Kim Strassel. And on Wednesday, the Federal Reserve at its latest Federal Open Market Committee monetary policy meeting kept rates where they are, had been earlier in this year, anticipating a rate cut at this meeting. That was taken away a long time ago, at least in market expectations, and disinflationary progress, that is a reduction in the rate of inflation, has given the Fed pause. The Consumer Price Index from March, 3.5% on an annual rate. But Jay Powell is pretty optimistic about the economy, the state of the economy, and about the progress he continues to expect in the future at the current monetary policy against inflation. Let's listen.
Right now we have 3% growth, which is, pretty solid growth, I would say, by any measure. And we have inflation running under 3%. So most forecasters, including our forecasting, was that that last year's level of growth was very high, 3.4% in, I guess, the fourth quarter, and probably not going to be sustained and would come down. But that would be our forecast. That wouldn't be stagflation. That would still be to a very healthy level of growth. And of course, with inflation, we will return inflation to 2%, and that won't be. So I don't see the stag or the flation, actually.
All right, no stag, no inflation. He comes to that 2.8% inflation rate that he mentioned versus the one I mentioned, the 3.5. They're different measures. CPI is 3.5. That's consumer prices. The Fed looks at personal consumption expenditures, which has come in lower. It looks at core, taking out energy and food. But the growth in the first quarter was only 1.6%. That's not gangbusters. So how do you react to Powell, Mary?
I feel a little bit for Powell because his job and what he has said they're going to do is look at the data as it comes in. So most of the rest of us are sort of thinking forward about where's this going and don't they have to anticipate? But he says, no, I'm using the data. And basically using the data, what he sees is that core PCE, as I mentioned, 2.8%. He continues to reiterate that he's not going to move that 2% target. I think on some level, when people hear him say that he's not going to hike at that point, that was a sign that he was dovish. And I don't think that's really fair. He's sticking with his 2%. He keeps reiterating 2%. And the market is just waiting for him to do something that will send it a signal that he's going to start cutting rates. And the very fact that he never used the word hike or didn't even mention it, I think people came away thinking that he's dovish, but I don't think that's really the right way to think about it.
No question. He ruled out a rate hike, essentially. He said that it's unlikely that the next move by the Fed would be a rate increase. And there had been some people in the market suggesting that that would happen. But he didn't say we're going to cut. He said we're going to follow the data, as you say. I think the salient question, Kim, to my mind is his Federal Reserve monetary policy now as restrictive as Powell says it is? He thinks it's quite restrictive and restrictive enough to bring down the rate of inflation. And there was no doubt that that was the case. It had brought down the rate of inflation across 2023, but that progress has been stalled in 2024. And the question for markets and I think for the Fed is this policy as restrictive as we thought it was, given the fact that there seems to be plenty of liquidity out there in the marketplace, plenty of risk-on behavior. Commodity prices have been pretty buoyant across most commodities. And I'm not saying I know the answer to that question. I'm just saying I think it is a question.
We just don't know. I mean, as he said, I don't see the stag. I don't see the flation. And the goal, obviously, of the Fed here is to manage some level of growth and have it coexist with falling inflation. And I agree that that's something that can happen. You can manage it. But I think there's a real worry here that there's a little bit too much confidence in what they've done too far, especially given some of those indicators that we see out there. You were just talking about inflation sort of roaring back in the first quarter. There's been some pretty buoyant economic indicators, according to him. I mean, is thing actually bouncing back up again, or are they getting this under control? And the one thing that does worry me, Paul, in his comments is just that I sometimes worry that the Fed, because it's convenient for them to explain away how they got in this situation in the first place, are looking at some of the wrong numbers and indicators here as they make their path. They continue, for instance, to want to lay all this off on supply chain disruptions that came about because of COVID, and their refusal to acknowledge their own role in this, and just in terms of easy money. The Fed never wants to acknowledge its role in anything. And if it's going to close its eyes now to the continued problem, that's, in my mind, the real risk going forward.
Mary, I want to give you the last word on this and where you think this is headed.
I think that we had a productivity surge in the fourth quarter of last year. And when you have a productivity surge, the Fed is not as restrictive as it thinks it is because it doesn't anticipate that. So I think we saw the result of that in the first quarter. But you're having signals from the job market, from some retailers like Starbucks, of slowing consumer appetite to spend money or to be able to spend money. And like if you look at the quits rate in employment, it's not as high as it was there for a while. So there's lots of suggestions that the economy is slowing down. And the best he can do is sort of keep the ship steady for now. May very well turn out that he's been too tight for too long. That's a risk that he's also facing. And I think that's why he refused to move in either direction and just sort of repeated the same thing. We're not going higher, but we're not going lower. And the market's anxious for those cuts, but I thought he handled it rather well.
Boy, does the market want those rate cuts. The Wall Street wants. Let's get the good times rolling again, baby. All right. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.